in a certain distance where they say, I would like to sit in the back and study you from a distance, but what they are really saying is, I want you to keep a distance because don't come and look at me. I don't want you to see me as I am right now. Just let me sit here in the dark so that I can pretend that you can't see me. And this is all they are ready for. And I'm making fun of it, but I am not putting these students down in any way. I understand their needs. I respect their needs. But I am also giving a teaching for those who have already stepped up and those who are willing to step up. Because if you will look at your MO of how you look at Ascended Masters, how you can relate to us, what you expect and don't expect, what you expect can happen and what can't happen. If you will look at this and see that now you have actually risen to a higher understanding of the path to Christhood. And therefore your original motivation, the original way you looked at Ascended Masters, is now really a dead weight that you are dragging along. It is not relevant for your present level of understanding. If you will see this, then you can dismiss that. And then you don't have that division in your being, where something pulls you away from us and something pulls you towards us. And then you can take a step up and relate to us in a closer way. This messenger has described how he followed an Ascended Master teaching and practiced it eagerly for over 15 years. And then one day suddenly came to the point where he looked at our pictures and spontaneously said, I want more. I want a closer relationship to you. I want a more direct interaction with you. And you all have the potential to make a similar decision. I'm not telling you to make it with the outer mind, but I am telling you to, in your outer mind, look at where you are at on the path. What are you ready for? Are you ready to step up to a higher level? Are you ready to step a little bit closer and say, Jesus, it's okay that you look at me once in a while. Perhaps you can come and tell me a few things, but don't tell me too much, no more than I can handle. But I assure you that we will respond to this, because what are we actually really doing when we have students and when you enter a student-master relationship with us? What is the spiritual path, the path to Christhood, all about? It is all about coming into oneness. In the end, it is about the conscious you coming into oneness with the I Am Presence. But as an intermediary step, we offer you a path where we are the teachers that are perhaps easier for you to grasp when you have an outer teaching than your I Am Presence. And so the real path of the Ascended Masters is to come into oneness with us, or at least one of us that is closest to your heart. So you see that when you first found the teachings, you may have carried with you this traditional Christian idolatry of putting the Master up on a pedestal. And therefore you might have thought that in order to interact with such an elevated Master, you had to reach a certain level of perfection. And you felt you hadn't reached that perfection, and that is why you just wanted to sit in the back so that the Master couldn't see you, and you could remain hidden because you would feel something, shame, guilt, embarrassment, whatever, if the Master saw your imperfections. And so we of course allow you to do this, but many of you are at the point where you can make that switch in consciousness where you realize that it isn't actually painful to have us look at you and point something out, because we always do it for the purpose of helping you grow and helping you be more free. And if you are more free, what happens? You feel better about yourself. As long as you are sitting there at a distance wanting to hide something from us, you are actually also hiding something from yourself. And if you're hiding from something from yourself, you can't overcome it. But what you're hiding will make you feel bad about yourself in some way. And so, only when you look at it and overcome it, will you feel better about yourself. This is simple logic. I realize that 99.99999% of the people on earth do not think it is simple, but it really is, at least when you reach your level. And so you can come to that point where you look at your MO and you see you still have that original desire to keep the masters at a distance, and you can say, I just don't need you anymore. Why are you still hanging around? Get lost. And so then you can make that shift, and you can begin to ask yourself a simple question. What kind of master am I following? Is it a friendly master or a hostile master? And then you will realize that the image that has been projected into the collective consciousness by the fallen beings now for thousands and thousands of years is that God is a hostile God. And therefore anyone who is up there in the spiritual realm and represents God must be a hostile being. And you even have in some past ascended master organizations the concept that, for example, in Moya or Serapis Bay are strict disciplinarians. And they are like the old-fashioned school teacher who is just looking for an excuse to spank the students. But El Moya does not have a stick that he goes around hitting his students with. He never has had, and he never will have. And so you see that this collective image of the hostile teacher who is somehow out to discipline you or expose you and make you feel bad about yourself for having some imperfection, this is not who we are. It is completely out of touch with the reality of who we are. And when you recognize this in yourself, you can begin to separate yourself from it. You can step back and you can see it, and then you can truly just let it go. And there will come that point. You may have to do some invocations and invoke the transformation of the energy. You may have to ask for our help to see it, but there will come that point where you just let it go and you feel that spontaneous release. And suddenly you realize that we are not hostile. We are not out to get you. We're not out to expose you. We're not out to humiliate you. And I recognize that some people will take the teachings I've given and they will feel that I am exposing something in your psychology that isn't the way it should be. And so they will again project this image that I am actually out to expose something in you. And in a sense, of course I am. But I'm not out to expose something that makes you feel shameful or embarrassed. I'm out to set you free. And so here's where you can take another step up and you can recognize. When you look at the image you have had of spiritual masters and what you expect they will do or not do, you can probably identify that there is a negative aspect of this, where you might think, for example, that we will expose something in you, and then you might look at what is your fear in relation to this. If I pulled one of you up here and told you that you had this tendency in your psychology, what would you feel? Now all of you go through this exercise just for a second. Imagine that each of you were taken up here in front of the entire group, and I told you very directly, you have this or that tendency in your psychology. What do you fear? What would you feel? Do you feel shame? Do you feel embarrassment? What is your feeling? Well, my beloved, that feeling is part of what holds you back on the path. It is part of what prevents you from interacting with us. And so what I'm saying here is this. You can step back and you can say, am I feeling this? Or is this an internal spirit that defines my MO, my relationship to ascended masters, how I look at the masters, how I think I can relate to them? Is it the spirit that is feeling this, or is it me? And you can come to recognize, but it's not me, it's the spirit. And then, as you dismiss that spirit and make the calls on it, you can make that switch in the mind, and you can say, for example, if you would feel embarrassed if an ascended master exposed an imperfection in your psychology, you can say, why should I feel embarrassed about this? Why should I? It was the spirit that felt this. So why should I continue to look at the master hoping that he won't come and embarrass me? I don't need to feel embarrassed about this, or shameful, or fearful, or whatever. Why do I need to feel this? And then you can gradually shift where you recognize that we are not out to embarrass you. We are out to set you free, so you feel better about yourself. Because of course you're not feeling good about yourself if you're constantly afraid of being embarrassed. And then you can take another step further, and you can look at that you probably also had some positive expectation of what might happen when you became an ascended master student. Many students have an expectation of somehow being acknowledged or recognized or honored by the ascended masters. We have, ironically, had a previous ascended master organization where most students had the masters way up there on a pedestal, and they had a very fear-based relationship to us. But at the same time, many students had this compulsive desire to get recognized publicly and acknowledged by us. And it is a very complex psychology where you both have the fear and you both have the hope of being acknowledged. But really, is it logical that you fear someone but you still want to be acknowledged by them? What is the likelihood that they will acknowledge you versus the likelihood that they will actually do what you fear most and put you down? It becomes this very artificial relationship that such students have to us. And it makes them virtually unreachable to us because we cannot approach them directly. We cannot give them an experience. We cannot give them inner direction because they are trapped in this push-pull. And of course, if you go to many Christian churches, that is how they look at God, that is how they look at me. That is why there are many Catholics that find they can relate to Mother Mary more freely than they can relate to me because she doesn't seem so threatening. And you have this in many other religions. But again, if you're an ascended master student and you recognize this pattern in you, why do you have it? Is it yours? Most likely it is something you have taken on from the collective consciousness. And so just take a look at it, work on it, get to the point where you are neither fearing a direct encounter with an ascended master, nor are you hoping for it so that it could boost your pride and make your ego feel special. And when you come to that point where you can relate to us without any expectation either way, without any expectation motivated by fear or any expectation based on pride, then you can come to the point where when you relate to us, you can be neutral. You can be open. And there are no expectations that are standing in our way. And when you are just open, you will experience our presence much more directly than you have ever done before. And this is, of course, what we desire for you. Now, this is Pentecost time, and you all know the story about how after my departure from the physical realm, my disciples were all distraught, not knowing what to do, what was to come next. But then they met, and somehow there was a shift in their consciousness. And they came into what is described as being of one accord in one place. And they actually came to what I have just described, where instead of having these fear-based expectations that this was the end of it and nothing would ever happen again, or instead of having the prideful expectations that they would be elevated and they would be the ones who carried the movement forward, most of them, not all, but most, came to the point of just being neutral, just being open. And it was that neutrality, that point of no expectation, that was the opening for what has been described as the descent of the Holy Spirit. And now again, in a sense, you could say, what have we been doing with the teachings we have given through this messenger? We have, in a sense, been deconstructing the images that people have of ascended masters based on previous dispensation. We have actually taken ourselves down from the pedestal. We have attempted to decrease the distance between you and us. Of course, we haven't been attempted to do this in real terms. We have been attempting to decrease the distance in your minds. The distance you think is there, that you project is there between you and us. Because we, of course, are beyond time and space. And that means I am with you always. If you want me, if you put your attention on me. It is not a matter of you crossing some distance. It's not a matter of me being way above you in distance or even in vibration, which of course I am, but I'm still here with you. It's not a matter of you crossing this chasm. It is simply a matter of you getting rid of all the images and expectations in your mind. We have ascended master students who, symbolically speaking, are standing there with their eyes glued to this giant telescope because they think that we are way, way, way out there in space. And so they need this giant telescope to see us. And the giant telescope is their elaborate intellectual understanding of the teaching. And what we are doing is we are waiting for them to take their eye away from the telescope, and they say, oh, there you are. And I have been there for the last 2,000 years next to them, and they haven't bothered to pay attention because they have been looking way, way out there for me. And so, this is of course what we desire for all of you, those who have followed our path for a long time, those who have applied yourself to the path to Christhood. And again, let us take the expectations down. You have the stories that when I was in embodiment, I performed all of these miracles. You have 2,000 years of humankind creating these very, very powerful, very, very elaborate collective spirits about how incredibly special it must have been if you had been there at the time of Jesus. But if you go back there and look at the reality, you will see that most of my disciples were actually like the person with the eyes glued to the telescope. And even though they were following me and interacting with me physically every day, they hardly ever paid direct attention to me because they had so many expectations that they were looking at me through. And you see this exemplified in the story of Peter, where I said, "Get thee behind me, Satan," because I was trying to shock him out of his expectations so that he could actually relate to me in a neutral way. But most of the people I encountered back then couldn't, and so they didn't even really notice what kind of a being was standing there next to them. They didn't recognize that I had a higher state of consciousness. So what I'm saying is that this fantasy image that Christians have created later of how incredibly special it was, well, this never happened in reality. There were many people who didn't notice. There were even those who had seen me walk on water, for example, and who afterwards couldn't really believe what they had seen. And so, as we have said before, the collective consciousness was so dense back then that it took much more of a dramatic event to even get people's attention. And so again, when you look at this situation of Pentecost, many Christians have created these elaborate images that the disciples were suddenly speaking in tongues. They were suddenly speaking in a language or in other languages so that other people could understand them. And even Ascended Master students tend to look at this as some dramatic event. And they think that, like the Pentecostals, that they were speaking in angelic tongues, or they think that some other Christians, like they fell over, people fell over in the spirit and were shaking and had to be carried out of there and all of this. And there is still this MO, this collective spirit that many Ascended Master students have, that they are longing for some dramatic event. Some are longing for a dramatic event in their own life, for them to have some dramatic encounter with us that suddenly changes everything. Some are longing for a dramatic event that makes other people see them as special. And many Ascended Master students over the decades have longed for some dramatic event where we appear in the sky, or where the students themselves have the Holy Spirit and they can make people fall over, and they can heal people, they can do all of these things. So there is physical proof of the reality of Ascended Masters, and therefore millions of people will be converted. And of course these students will be the one who brought it about, so they will be elevated and honored. And all of this mindset that has been created, where Ascended Master students have carried what has been created by Christians over these 2,000 years, where many Christians have also dreamt of this, being special, being elevated. And so you take this and you transfer this to Ascended Masters, and you are projecting all of this upon us, and you think that if you get the Holy Spirit, something dramatic must happen, and that it's possible that you could have an event where suddenly all people started speaking in tongues and all started taking a dictation, or whatever people imagine. And on the one hand, I don't want to limit what can happen. The Holy Spirit can manifest in various ways. But I want you to have a realistic assessment here, that in the modern age, we are not performing miracles because humankind has risen to a higher level of consciousness where it is possible to get their attention in other ways. We are not looking to convert everybody to recognize Ascended Masters. We are not looking to create some undeniable manifestation, because the law of free will is clear. There must be plausible deniability. It must be easy for people to deny our existence. So we are not going to manifest some undeniable proof. And so, even when it comes to the descent of the Holy Spirit, we are not looking to create a spectacle, my beloved. We want you to recognize that each and every one of you have experienced that you have had the Holy Spirit. You most likely experience this when you're talking to others about something that you really care about, something that is dear to your heart, and you can recognize that there are times where your voice might change a little bit, your vibration changes, and you are just very, very sincere. But, my beloved, you are also in a neutral state of mind. You're not aggressively seeking to convert the other person. You don't have a desire to be acknowledged so you don't feel rejected. You are simply speaking from a higher level of your being. And this is a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. Now, this whole idea that the disciples spoke in other languages that they did not know is not actually correct. It is all that people could project on the event based on the linear mindset. The deeper reality is that some of the disciples were infused with the Holy Spirit so that they could suddenly express the ideas of what Christianity was about in such a way that people from many different backgrounds could grasp the concepts and ideas. And this is one of the primary manifestations of the Holy Spirit that I would like you to strive for, is so that you would be able to go into that neutral state of mind and be able to speak to people from many different backgrounds. And instead of giving them some absolute truth that with your outer mind you think they should have, you are giving them exactly what they need to take the next step on their path. You may not know this in the outer mind. You may not know why you are telling them this, but you just feel the flow and you go with the flow. This is a much more valuable manifestation of the Holy Spirit than some kind of spectacle. Now you may say, are you not putting on a spectacle now? Well, yes, in a way. But is it as dramatic as many Ascended Master students expect, or as many Christians expect? Nay, it is not. And so we are attempting to give you something that still is beyond the normal level of consciousness, but it's not so far beyond that it reinforces your sense of distance. We realize that whatever we do will reinforce the sense of distance of some people, but you will notice how many teachings we have given over the years through this messenger that actually are specifically designed to help you decrease the distance that you project is there between you and us. I am with you always. You and you and you and you. Each and every one of you. I am with you always. So is any Ascended Master that is close to your heart. Which Master is closest to your heart? My beloved, I have no jealousy. I have no desire to be exclusive. It does not in any way affront me if there's another Master that is closer to your heart. Why not? Because I'm one with that Master. And so, find the Master that is closest to your heart. Step back from your busy daily life. Step back from your busyness with the path, with your studies, with your giving invocations. Make some time where you can sit down and look at, how am I relating to Ascended Masters? Here's the Master that I feel closest to. How can I find a new way to relate to that Master so that I decrease the distance? I come closer. I have a more direct experience. Perhaps even ask yourself, am I ready for a more direct experience with an Ascended Master? If you're not, again, I don't criticize, I don't judge, I don't condemn. I fully understand that everyone needs to take a certain time before they are ready. But you see, my beloved, you are here because when you experience a dictation, you have a sense of reality. That Ascended Masters exist. We can speak to you. I'm just asking you to switch your mind so that you recognize that as we exist and as we can speak through a messenger, we can also interact with you more directly, personally, in your mind, in your heart. And if you are ready for this, then perhaps this would be a time for you to step up, to be more direct, and to find a different way to interact with us. Perhaps you could look at your MO, as I have called it, of how you interact with us. And you could see, you could ask yourself, based on my current expectations, what do I think would happen if an Ascended Master came closer to me? And you will often find that there's a part of your mind, a part of your ego, that is actually afraid of what kind of changes you would have to make if that happened. And this might be a field where it could take you some time to deal with this issue. This is not something that for most of you will happen in 5 minutes. But when you reach a certain level, there's value in thinking about this, contemplating it. What do I think would happen in my life And there will be a part of your being that is afraid that certain outer changes would have to be made, certain things you would have to give up, and all of these things. And if you will honestly look at this and examine it, you can gradually begin to see what is going on, see your unconscious expectations. You can begin to look at them. You can begin to maybe compare them to some of our teachings. And you can begin to consider whether this is simply an expectation that you might have taken on from the collective consciousness, or whether it's a part of your ego. And you can gradually come to the point where you become clear about where you stand right now. You may come to recognize that yes, there is a part of your ego that has a certain fear and that does not want to change because there's a particular thing in your life that you don't want to give up. Now, just to give you a basic example, there was a student in Korea who asked whether you could be a Ascended Master student and still go to parties and drink in a social context. And he was not willing to give up this because it was an important part of his family and culture to drink at these social events. And so, this is just one example of an expectation you might have. And so, if you are willing, you can take a look at this. And you can approach it in various ways. You can even come to a point where you realize that it is not a loss for you to give this up because you are actually ready to step up to a different level. Some of you have come to this point of just spontaneously deciding that you are going to give up alcohol. But this is just an example. Do not fixate your mind on this, because there are many other things that you might think you have to give up. But there's always the possibility, my beloved, that you can find a different way to look at the issue, so that you don't have to give up the outer activity. For example, to take you another example, in previous Ascended Master dispensation, there were many students who felt that when they entered the Ascended Master teachings, they could not relate to people who were not in the teachings. Many had difficulty relating to their spouses, and many divorces have been created because of this. It has never been what we wanted to see happen. But this was how the culture was. And this was the reason. The reason was that they had a much more black and white way of looking at the path. You're either in or you're out. You're either fully in, and then you have to follow the rules, or you're out. And so, if you had a spouse that didn't want to go in, then you couldn't relate to that spouse and so forth, and there would be conflicts and all of this stuff. But the reality is that if you shift your consciousness, if you change your black and white view of the path and of the judgmental masters, then you can easily, or at least you can over time, find a way to relate to a spouse who is not on the spiritual path or not in the Ascended Master teaching. So you see, it is not simply a matter